All right, today we're digging into the latest quarterly report from Sagility. They're a really big deal in the U.S. healthcare services world, and the numbers they just posted, well, they're pretty stunning. So what's the real story behind this performance? Let's get into it.
Okay, let's start right at the top with revenue. Sagility's operations grew by almost 26% compared to the same time last year. Now, in this economy, any kind of double-digit growth is impressive, but this is a serious statement. It tells you the company's just expanding like crazy. But get this, that's not even the most eye-popping number in the report, not by a long shot.
Yeah, just look at that. Basic earnings per share. A super important measure of how profitable a company is. It just exploded. We're talking 530% year over year. And no, that is not a typo. 530%. A number like that just makes you stop and go, how? How on earth do you even do that? It's just not something you see every day, where profit growth leaves revenue growth in the dust like this.
So, right, how does a company pull off nearly 26% revenue growth, but then somehow turn that into a 530% explosion in profit? The math seems off, right? Well, to figure out that puzzle, we got to look past the headlines. And first things first, we need to really get a handle on who Sagility even is and what it is they do. So let's start right there.
Okay, so before we can really get into the how of it all, we've got to nail down the who. Just what is this company's role in the, let's face it, enormous U.S. healthcare industry?
So at its heart, Sagility is a super important partner for the U.S. healthcare system. They're not the doctors, they're not the hospitals, they're the people providing the essential services that make the whole thing actually work. You can almost think of them as the operational backbone, kind of like the air traffic control for the incredibly complex world of healthcare admin. So, what does that mean in the real world? Well, it means Sagility helps out both payers, we're talking the big insurance companies, and providers, so your hospitals and clinics. They handle all that complex admin work. And that could be anything, really, from managing claims to making sure a patient has a better experience when they have to call their insurance company. The goal is always the same, right? Make things run smoother, improve the quality of care, and keep costs in check. And they're obviously very good at it because they serve 5 of the top 10 health insurance companies in the U.S. That's a huge vote of confidence.
Now this is really telling. Check out their business mix. A whopping 88% of their money comes from the payer side. So again, those big insurance firms. And that focus is a huge part of their strategy, because it means their business is built on these really stable, large-scale contracts. The provider side is smaller for sure, but it's also an area where they see a lot of potential for growth.
Okay, just one quick technical thing before we jump into the how. When we talk about these numbers, we're looking at their consolidated results. All that means is we're looking at the whole shebang, the parent company and all of its 17 subsidiaries treated as one single thing. And this is really important because, as you're about to see, acquisitions are a huge piece of this story. So this view gives us the complete picture.
All right, so we know who they are and what they do. Now it's time for the main event. How did they actually pull this off? How did they get to that insane 530% profit number? Let's break it down. Let's really dissect the anatomy of this growth.
The answer really comes down to a powerful 1-2 punch. First off, their main business is just doing great on its own. It's delivered almost 18% organic growth. That's just from working with their current clients and signing up new ones. But then, on top of that, they're being really smart about buying other companies, and that gave them the rest of the boost. It's a strategy that is, well, clearly working wonders.
And a perfect example of that acquisition strategy is a company called Broadpath. They're another healthcare solutions provider in the U.S., and Sagility bought them early last year. This wasn't just a random purchase, it was a really strategic move. Broadpath fits right into what they already do, and it instantly grew their client list, especially with those mid-size insurance companies.
And this quote from their group CFO, this gives us the biggest clue to the whole puzzle. He says the acquisition is already working out with early gains. But listen closely to these other 2 phrases he uses: improved delivery efficiency and cost optimization. That's the secret sauce right there. That's exactly how you take strong revenue and turn it into absolutely spectacular profit.
And this chart, this lays it all out perfectly. Look at this. Their income shot up by over 24%, which is fantastic, right? But now look at their expenses. They only went up by about 14%. That gap,
That gap between the two is everything. They kept a really tight lid on their costs even as their revenue was soaring, and by doing that, they made every single new dollar they brought in incredibly profitable. That is the formula. That's how a 24% jump in income becomes a nearly 570% explosion in profit.
So, yeah, it's safe to say they absolutely crushed this quarter. But, the big question for any company that has a quarter like this is, can they keep it up? Was this just a fluke, a one-time thing, or is this a sign of what's coming next? Let's take a look at what the road ahead might hold.
The trend in their active client base tells a really powerful story. Growth was already solid heading into fiscal 24, but then just look at that jump last year, all the way to 75 active client groups. This is what confirms that the momentum we're seeing isn't a fluke. It's actually an acceleration of a trend that's been building for a few years now.
And if we look past the financials, the company's operational health just looks really solid. We're talking about a global team of almost 40,000 people. But what's really encouraging to see is that drop in employee attrition. Now, why does that matter? Well, think about it. When fewer experienced people quit, you get a more stable team, which means better service for your clients and, you guessed it, lower costs for the company. It's a really key sign of long-term health.
And this is interesting. The group CEO, Ramesh Gopalan, he's not ignoring the difficulties in the healthcare industry. He calls out the regulatory and policy shifts. But here's the twist. He frames those challenges as an opportunity. He's basically saying that as their clients get squeezed by rising costs, Sagility is the partner they need, the one that can come in with things like automation and AI to make them more efficient. So for them, market problems are actually a catalyst for their own business. And that brings us to the final and I think most important question. The U.S. healthcare system is, let's be honest, famously complex, and it's always changing. For most companies, that's a huge threat. But for a company like Sagility, a company that literally makes its money by managing that complexity, could those very same challenges actually be its next big growth opportunity? When you look at a quarter like this one, they are making one heck of a case that the answer is yes.